In 1518, a woman walked into the streets of Strasbourg and began to dance.
There was no music, no celebration, but she couldn't stop.
Then others joined her. As the days passed, the number grew. And soon, Strasbourg was facing one of the strangest events in recorded history.
But can a human being really lose control of their own body? And can that loss of control spread? This is Decode Station.
Part 1. The summer of 1518. We're in Strasbourg. It's July and the city streets are bustling. And then a woman, historical records identify her as Frau Trophäa, steps out into the street, and she begins to dance. There's no festival happening, you know? There are no musicians playing. Yet she dances. And she just continues to dance, completely without rest, for days.
Now, Frau Trophäa's solo movement didn't remain isolated for long. Just days later, as people observed her relentless motion, others in the city actually started to join her. This wasn't some sudden flash mob. It was a slow, genuinely unsettling accumulation of bodies in the street, all moving uncontrollably. The exact numbers are lost to history, but the historical records we do have are incredibly clear on one point. The situation escalated to such a degree that local authorities felt compelled to step in. It had become a crisis that demanded a solution.
Part 2. Searching for a cause. How the authorities responded here reveals so much about the medieval mind. If you are faced with dozens of citizens compulsively dancing in the streets, you might expect officials to force them to stop, right? But they didn't. Guided by the medical ideas of their era, these officials believed this was a purely physical illness caused by overheated blood. And the cure? They seriously believed the afflicted needed to literally dance the illness out of their systems. So the authorities rolled out a deeply unusual strategy. Initially, they actually cleared spaces in the local markets and guild halls. They even went so far as to hire musicians, pipers, and drummers to keep the afflicted moving. They were actively encouraging the dancing. But you can probably guess what happened. It backfired. Providing a rhythmic soundtrack didn't cure the dancers. Instead, it seemed to draw even more people right into the fray. Realizing their massive mistake, authorities abruptly pivoted. They restricted public dancing entirely. They banned the music. And finally, growing desperate for a solution, they gathered the dancers and sent them to a shrine dedicated to Saint Vitus, hoping for some sort of religious, spiritual healing where their medicine had completely failed. When investigating the dancing plague, it is absolutely crucial that we separate historical fact from sensational myth. If you've heard of this event before, you've probably heard the story that hundreds of people literally danced themselves to death, just dropping dead in the streets from strokes, heart attacks, and pure exhaustion. Some later legends even claim dozens died every single day. But for this explainer, we have to look closely at the actual evidence. Contemporary records do confirm a serious, deeply disruptive outbreak, but they do not verify those massive death tolls. Stating it as an established fact that hundreds died is simply misleading. The event was terrifying enough on its own, without us needing to sensationalize the uncertain details. So what actually caused all of this? Over the centuries, a lot of theories have been proposed. One of the most famous is the ergot poisoning theory. Ergot is a type of mold that grows on damp rye grain. If consumed, it acts very similarly to LSD. It can cause severe hallucinations, neurological symptoms, and convulsions. It sounds like a perfect explanation, right? But modern researchers point out a pretty major flaw. Severe ergot poisoning causes intense, painful physical spasms. It physically impairs the body and actually restricts blood flow to the limbs. So while it definitely causes twitching, it makes the kind of prolonged, coordinated, organized dancing observed in Strasbourg highly improbable. It's a popular theory for sure, but scientists consider it unlikely to be the complete explanation.
Part 3. A contagion of the mind. If it wasn't a poison food supply, we have to look elsewhere. We have to shift our investigation from the stomach to the brain. We must consider a contagion not of the body, but of the mind.
Today, one of the leading modern interpretations of the dancing plague is a condition known as mass psychogenic illness. This happens when a group of people operating under severe, shared psychological stress begin to manifest genuine physical symptoms. And I want to be very clear here. This does not mean they were pretending. They were not faking it. The human brain is immensely powerful. Psychogenic symptoms, whether that's twitching, fainting, or in this specific case, dancing, are completely real to the people experiencing them. And most importantly, as people observe others suffering from these frightening symptoms, the condition can spread socially.
Now, for a mass psychogenic illness to really take hold, a community needs to be a powder keg of stress. And Strasbourg in 1518 was exactly that.
Consider the environmental factors acting as kindling here. The people of this region were enduring brutal hardships. A succession of bad harvests had led to severe hunger and widespread famine. New and terrifying diseases, like syphilis, were sweeping through the population. Economic pressure was crushing the working class, and the social instability was absolute. This was a population pushed to the very edge of human endurance. The psychological distress they were under was immense.
Part 4. The Burden of Belief. This brings us to what I think is the most fascinating question of this entire historical mystery. Why dancing? If the people of Strasbourg were suffering from such immense psychological distress, why didn't they just collapse? Why didn't they fall into a collective coma or break out in hives? Why did their trauma specifically manifest as a compulsive need to dance? Well, the answer lies in the cultural framework of that specific era.
And this brilliantly illustrates the sheer power of belief. In medieval Europe, there was a deeply held, localized religious belief regarding Saint Vitus. The people of Strasbourg had been taught for generations that Saint Vitus was a wrathful saint who could look down upon sinners and punish them with a literal curse of uncontrollable dancing. When extreme psychological stress fractures the mind, the symptoms it produces aren't just random. The distress takes the specific form that a culture has already taught its people to fear. Because they genuinely believed the dancing curse was possible, it became possible.
And Strasbourg in 1518 wasn't an isolated anomaly. Generations earlier, back in 1374, a massive outbreak of so-called dancing mania swept through multiple communities along the Rhine River. Other smaller episodes were recorded across medieval and early modern Europe too. This was part of a larger cultural pattern. It was a recognized, terrifying phenomenon that lived in the collective consciousness of the people. In another century, under a different set of beliefs, this same immense stress might have produced entirely different symptoms.
Part 5. An enduring mystery. As we look back, modern interpretations naturally try to neatly categorize the past. But the truth is, we simply cannot apply a modern medical diagnosis with absolute certainty to people who lived and died over 5 centuries ago. Historical evidence is always going to be incomplete. We can't draw their blood, we can't interview Frau Trophäa, and that leaves us confronting a deeper and honestly much more disturbing mystery about the human condition itself.
Maybe what spread through Strasbourg in 1518 wasn't a virus.
Maybe it wasn't poison. Maybe it was fear, stress, and the extraordinary power of an entire community believing that something could happen to them. More than 500 years later, we still don't know for certain.
Stay curious, stay skeptical.